Good morning, everybody. I'm Christopher Klunge, Vice President of Sales and Marketing with IT-ROI Solutions. Welcome to the Integration Best Practices webinar. I'll be your host today, and as always on our webinars, we're fortunate enough to have Federico Pena go through these best practices with you today. And for those of you that don't know, we started out as a consulting company many years ago, and through the process of doing consulting and making our jobs easier, we created software which is now available to you. So what I'm going to do as people get trickling in here is I'm going to go ahead and do a few housekeeping sessions, enable you to understand how you can ask questions today. We always encourage the interactive nature of these webinars, and so we have two ways for you to ask questions today. Using the GoToWebinar panel on the bottom right-hand part of your screen, as you can see the red box around the arrow. And go ahead and just type your questions in there, and we'll attend to those as soon as we can, and from time to time Federico will stop and address questions as well. Also, we've been encouraging people to use the hashtag CAZOG so that the conversation can go on in perpetuity. Also, as far as another housekeeping item, we're going to go ahead and record the webinar today, and then we'll make it available to you as early as next Monday. We'll just send it out to you as being part of the attendance of this event. So as far as the way that we operate with the Q&A, we're going to go through the integration process using ZOG, and he's going to show you some examples. Go ahead and answer the questions. Federico will pause. I think it's going to be somewhere around 65 to 70% of the way through. He's going to answer some questions. If you see something that's really important or is pertaining to the slide that he's on at the time, he'll stop and answer it then. And then we'll go ahead and circle back at the end, and we'll wrap up. And gosh, I'm gonna say that I'm super excited this morning because not only is this going to be best practices rolled out, so an opportunity for us to help with the community, but also this integration as a service concept that's out there. We're rolling out a couple of cool things on the website, so if you have questions, sometimes people have questions about pricing and things like that. We're going to go ahead and put a calculator up out there for you guys to be able to do sort of a self-service idea if you were going to maybe put together sort of a sketched up budget or something like that. So really exciting news there. Integrations as a service as a concept is exciting, and the fact that Federico is one of the premier experts in integrations in the business today. So really encourage your participation. The more questions you ask, the more you're going to get out of it. And if you ever felt like you really wanted to make a difference in the organization that you're working within, sometimes taking these small integrations, they can make a huge impact on your site. So with that, I think I'm just going to go ahead and fasten my seatbelt and manage the console. Turn it over to Federico Pena. Are you ready, Federico?
Yeah, I'm ready. Thanks, Christopher. And I want to thank everyone that attended. I see we've got a huge turnout, probably one of the highest turnouts we've had so far this year. So I want to thank everyone again. As far as the webinar topics, I'm basically going to cover four main items. The number one is the best practices workflow. And what I want to say here, even though this is going to be one slide, and I'm going to spend probably 80% of the whole webinar on this one slide, if you're going to miss any part of this webinar, this is not the slide to miss. Okay, this is where really we discuss how data should be treated, what the best approach is for manipulating the data, and really what the best methodologies are for getting that data into clarity and be able to report. And we've actually provide a workflow of what the best practices for that would be. So like I said, I'm going to spend most of the time of the webinar on that one workflow. Then we're going to discuss some common technologies and platforms. So, what are the common languages, common OSs, that kind of thing. How do we schedule integrations? Then we're going to get into validating data and batch with ZOG. And the reason I put both of those together is they're sort of interrelated. The more you validate, the bigger you can batch, and I'll discuss points of why that is the case. And then integration results. So as everyone knows, right, no matter what, at the end of the integration, somebody needs to know what happened, whether it was good or bad. And last but not least, point number 5, which is the new service announcement. I'm going to leave that up to Christopher, so he'll he'll cover that part. As Christopher said, the important part of all of these webinars is for you guys to ask questions, right? Interactive questions make the webinar better. It's a better feel for everybody. And also, if you have particular doubts on any piece, right? We're here to help. If we're doing a best practices, we're here to help you guys understand what solution works best for you, or at least we can share our experiences of what we've done in the past and what has worked for us in the past. And you never know, maybe we've seen your particular situation and we might be able to help. So as I said, we're going to start off with the best practices workflow. So you notice this workflow has several steps, and it basically has a start and an end and some endpoints with some notifications. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get started. So the first point we have here is the integration starts, okay? So what's the first thing that happens when for the integration to start is, we need to get the data from the source. Now, whether it would be a flat file that comes from an FTP, or you have a SME on the other tool set, let's say SAP or PeopleSoft or whatever, they provide a query or a web service call for you or something, we need to get that source data, okay? That's the first step that we need, is the source data. And like I said, the way it comes, whether it's a flat file, query, web service, that's really irrelevant at this point. Because this workflow really is going to cover all of the different types of integrations, okay? And the whole logic of the workflow is going to be the same. It doesn't really matter what type of integration it's doing. So the first thing is, like I said, we extract the data from the source. So, the first thing that the integration needs to do is, the first question is, can it connect to the source, right? Because it's common, if it's in a database, the database passwords could have changed or expired, or in an FTP, or, there's no connectivity, or there's a firewall problem or anything. So the first thing it does is, can it connect to the source? And as you notice, we have a yes and a no. If it's a no, we end the integration, right? Because if there's no source data, we can't really do anything. We send the notification, we end. If we can connect, okay, the next thing we need to do is we need to take that data and we need to stage it somewhere, okay? And the reason we need to stage it is we need to take it out of its original format, however it came, right? And we need to put it somewhere where we can actually use it. So think of the standard ETL process, right? Extract, transform, load, right? So we've extracted the data. The next step that we're going to need to do is we're going to need to transform that data. But to be able to transform that data, we need to have it somewhere in a standard format. So we normally stage it in a database staging table. And I'm gonna cover, how we actually use database tables, what types of database tables, how we name them, all of that stuff in a second. So like I said, the data is stored in a database staging table. Now I'm gonna stop here for a second, and I'm gonna just cover possible problems that you could have when building these database staging tables. So critical things to do, or common problems that we see all the time when people build these database staging tables is, let's say from the data source you're expecting a field, and that field is of type number, okay? And in your data stage table, when you create your staging table, you create that column that is expecting that field as of type number. Well, that to us is a big no-no, and the reason is, if for some reason, the number comes unformatted or whatever, and it comes as a string, right, the database is going to choke when it tries to insert that field in there, and therefore, if the database chokes, it's going to be choking on inserting that data. Therefore, you're never going to know where the error was, okay? So key things to keep in mind when you're building your staging tables, okay? Make all your columns strings, okay? All of them, it doesn't matter. Second problem we see very often is data length problems. So, everyone says, all right, well, we're going to make these columns, we're going to make them all varchar 200. But what happens is you've got some type of description field, and the description field comes in longer than what you expected. Well, the same thing's going to happen, right? It's going to truncate that, and therefore it's not going to be able to insert the data. You're not going to know what happened. It's going to cause an error halfway through your inserting. So you want to be very careful on how you do this, especially if you're batching your inserts. Sometimes you batch your inserts in group, depending on your data set, groups of 500, 1,000, 10,000, that kind of thing. So it's going to make a big chunk of your data load fail, and then obviously continuously it's not going to allow the rest of the data to go in. So, make sure that your staging table is, all large, obviously large enough for any of your data feeds. A common thing that I always tell clients when we're building integrations is, we would like to see a year's worth of data for testing, because if you see a year's worth of data, then you can say, well, you can pretty much guarantee that it's not going to fail for another year, right? Because no matter what, if there is a possible problem that you're going to have, the odds are that you're going to see it at some point. So those are common issues that you can have when building your staging table. Now, the next thing the integration does is it says, can it connect to the staging database, right? So those are also, that's another showstopper, right? So if it can't connect to that data staging table to insert the data or to extract the data or to manipulate it, then the integration is obviously going to fail because you can't really do any of the transform part of the ETL. And then the next step that we do is we read clarity for referential data. Now, when I say we read clarity for referential data, I'm sure most of you are familiar with XOG. XOG's pretty finicky. So you want to make sure, if you have lookups, that the lookups are correct, that they're translated correctly. So you want to do this with referential data. And there are some integrations that are more complicated than others. For example, if you're doing timesheet integrations, well, you need the task internal ID and so on, right? So you want to query this data, especially for on-demand clients. So, on-demand clients are going to want to extract that data from their on-demand system and put it in this same database that the staging data is at. Because once we get into validation, you're going to need to be making replacements. So let's say, task ID TSK1001 that belongs to project X might have the ID 5,000,000 XXXXX, right? Well, for timesheet data, it's going to require that 5,000,000 ID. So therefore, you need to make a translation for that data, okay? So that's where your clarity referential data is going to be stored. If you're on premise, a lot of things that we've done for clients is, we ask that this particular database where your data source is stored have read access to the clarity database. So if this has read access to the clarity database, then you can perform that referential data integrity check in flight on the way. Okay? And then obviously, this is the other showstopper is, can the connection be established? Okay? So can you connect to clarity to grab this referential data? Okay? So these are basically the three showstoppers, right? If you can't read the source, if you can't stage the data, or you can't get referential data, right, the integration has to come to a stop, it has to end, and you have to send a notification. Now, I'm going to spend a couple of seconds on notifications because it isn't just sending a notification saying the integration failed, right? Notifications it's critical that you provide very clear information to the admin of what happened, right? If it couldn't connect to the source, try and provide what the problem was, right? Usually you get an error, invalid username or password, or path doesn't exist, or that kind of thing. You want to try and be as granular as possible, and you want to trap that error as clearly as possible so you can provide very informative information for the admin to be able to make a good decision, right? Remember, these integrations, you as a consultant or so on are going to be at this client site for, a month, 2 months, 6 months or so on, but these admins are going to be there supporting these integrations forever and ever. So you want to make their life as easy and as straightforward as possible, right? So you want to try and make sure that, whenever there is a problem, it's a 5-minute fix, not a half a day to fix an integration, right? So that's where, the notification is a key part. All right, so now we've got the data extracted, we've got it staged. We have the referential data from Clarity in the same staging database. Now what do we need to do? We're going to get into the T part, so we're going to get into the transformation, right, of the ETL. So we've extracted the data. Now we need to transform the data, okay? So for us, what we found, one of the best methods to transform the data is via a stored procedure, okay? And the reason we do stored procedures is, we have the source data, we have the staging data, we have all the referential data. We write a stored procedure that does the comparisons for each field. And then once we do that, then we can actually put error messaging around that validation so we can utilize that later for notifications. And we're going to get into, we're going to spend a bit of time on the notifications in a bit. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pull up a validation store procedure so you can see sort of examples of what I'm talking about, of how we, what we have found to be the most effective or efficient way to be able to validate data across Clarity or across integration. So all right, so this is a sample integration that we've done. This is for risks, okay? So this is our risk validation store procedure, right? So, usually, we have if we're using SQL Server or Oracle, it's an alter or create, right, if it doesn't exist. So what's the first step we do is we wipe out our validation table. But actually, you know what? For these tables to actually mean something to you, I'm going to just pull up quickly a white paper, the design document for this, so you actually understand what types of tables and what the meaning of these tables are, so you can get a better understanding of what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to go here. I'm going to go to our website, and I'm going to go look for that particular risks integration. So I'm going to go integration as a service. And we're going to look for the risk integration, and we're going to download that white paper. All right. So I downloaded the white paper.
While you're doing that, real quick, are you there? I just wanted to say that you must be doing a phenomenal job because we don't have any questions in the chat yet. So if anybody's thinking of a question, go ahead and type it on in there. Just thought I'd interject before he went over this download. I will be back here in a little bit. Back to you.
I hear somebody say, I actually see a question on there that's asking if anybody hears anything. So is anybody having issues, audio issues?
That's a big deal. So he must not be logged into the audio on the GoToMeeting. He can call. I'll grab the phone number and send it over to him, Fed, just in case, so he can dial in to hear the audio.
Okay.
Hang on a second here. There's a.
All right, so I see somebody saying that he's able to hear without any problems. All right, so as long as it's not me.
Oh, he dialed in. Okay, cool. He's all set, Fed.
All right, perfect. All right, so these are the database tables that we use for, so here, this is our load file. So the first thing, like I said, we take that file, we load it into a staging database table, right? And then we have another table that says get lookups, right? So this is for our referential data, okay? And then the name of our staging tables are always the same, right? We go with Z underscore just because, that's a standard naming standard for custom tables, and then IB because we utilize a tool called the integration bridge, STG, which stands for staging, and then risks, which is the name of the integration. And then you notice we have another one with an underscore val. So this underscore val basically stores your validation. So the data validation that's going to happen within the stored procedure is actually stored here. And this will contain all the error messages inside of your validation. And then we have an REQ and an RES. And that really stands for request. So when we create the web service requests in the integration, we actually store the web service request in a table before we send them, okay? And then when we get the responses from Clarity, we store the responses, and obviously we map one to the other to make sure that we know that request number one has response number one, and that's done with this many-to-many table, okay? So, in short, all of our integrations are always going to have these 5 tables, and then, like I said, occasionally we have, depending whether you're on-premise, on demand, or what kind of functionality you may need, right, we'll have the load file and we have a get lookups, right? And depending how many integrations you may run, these may have load file risks or whatever naming you may want to use. Now I can start with the store procedure. All right, the first thing that we do is we're going to delete from the validation data anything that is new within this job ID, okay? And the reason we do this job ID is because we don't want to remove any previous integrations, because that you might need that for editing purposes or anything. But we just do this as a housekeeping item to make sure that there's no noise in that table. There shouldn't be, but you never know, right? Okay, then we basically start checking every single attribute one by one, okay? So in this case here, we check to make sure that the risk code is required, right? And you notice that we do an insert into the validation table, okay? And we have basically the validation result, the failed column, so which the column is, and what the reason is for failure, right? So we say, the validation result in this case, right, is failed, right, because the risk code is null. It can't be null because you can't insert something without a code, right? The column is risk code, right, and it says risk code is required, okay? And then, so on, we'll check for the length, right? So we want to make sure that the length is correct, right? So in this case here, it also failed, right, because the risk code was too long and the record has failed. And this is a business rule, because in some cases, right, you might say, well, you know what, if the risk code is too long, why don't we just truncate it? So that's a good example, for example, here, where we're checking for the description length, right? So in this case, we don't fail it. We just give you a warning, right? We provide a warning, and the field is the description, and it says the description was too long, so it was truncated to 250 characters. Okay, so what is it that we're trying to do, right? There's particular things, such as code or anything else, where you may not want to fail the integration just because it doesn't meet particular criteria. But in other cases where you might need that because, this is your unique identifier, right? You can't truncate it, you can't do anything else. Therefore, we have to make sure that we fail that particular record, right? Now, you notice that all we're doing is we're inserting into that table, into the validation table, okay? And the reason we insert into that validation table is because, a particular field might fail 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 different validations. Well, there's nothing worse than fixing the error, rerunning the validation, and realizing that it failed again for something else, right? So, instead of updating a particular field for that one record, we want to insert, as many as we possibly can. So we don't really care if one thing has failed. We don't stop there. We don't start updating. We keep inserting all of the possible error handling errors, and then I'm going to show you reporting-wise why we do that, okay? And like I said, so here we check everything, right? And then we check assignments, we check everything to make sure that everything meets all of the data criteria that Clarity is looking for. Remember, the clearer you make this notification and the clearer you make this error messaging, right, the easier life you're going to make for your project admin later on down the road, right? And also, it doesn't matter whatever it is that you want to do, okay? You must absolutely make sure that you tell people. So for example, I'm going to come back up here to the validation of the description, okay? So in this case, we're not failing the description if it's longer than 250 characters, okay? What we're doing is we're truncating it to 250, right? So you notice here, we're updating the staging table, right, to make sure that we truncate the length of that description. And I know that here we say 247. Usually we always go a couple of characters less than what it's expecting, just because XOG is finicky. and then, oh no, actually in this case here, it's because we actually added ... at the end of it. And this ... basically just says, like it was supposed to go on, right? But we make sure that we tell people, or we tell the admin, that we actually did this, because otherwise an end user is going to come and say, well, this is great, but this field said this and now it says this. Why did that happen, right? At least you have documented on how that data actually occurred. Okay. So I'm gonna go back into the workflow again. Because I'm in the validation, I see a question here that says, can you please elaborate on all kinds of validation error handling that we can do? So I'm going to back up here. Oops. So I'm going to say to answer that question, sky's the limit. So you can validate anything you want with the stored procedure, as long as you have the data in the source and the data that you want to validate against, and you have access to a Clarity database environment. There's absolutely nothing that you cannot do. And let me know if that answers your question. But if you have a particular example on what you're looking or you're trying to do, just feel free to post it on the question. I'll show you different methodologies on what we can do to actually make that happen. All right, so now we've got the validation stored procedure. The procedure has executed. We've loaded our validation table. We've passed all the errors, and everything, right? And obviously we stored all the validation messages in the DB. So that was done in the _val table. Okay, now what we need to do is we need to actually grab the data and start building our web service calls, right? So you notice when we were doing this inserts and so on, we have different types of validation results, right? We have some that are failed, some that are warnings, and so on, right? So what we want to do is we want to grab all of the data from the staging table that do not have a record that's marked as failed, because if it's failed, it's gonna fail your XOG, right? So whenever you mark it failed is because no matter what, XOG just isn't going to work unless that's fixed, right? Warnings we will send to Clarity, right? But we will send it, with a particular, we will have a particular error message description. So in this case, what do I want to do? I want to build the messages with everything where the validation result does not equal failed. Okay, so that's how we're gonna query the database table to be able to grab the data that we want to use to be able to build our web service messages. Okay. Now, when we start building our web service messages, and I'm going to talk about this in a couple of slides down the road, which is going to be validating and batching. Okay, so it's critical, building your messages is critical that you build messages in the right size. And when I say in the right size is, how many actual instances do you want to send in one message? And everything has pros and cons. So there's two things to keep an eye out on, right? Performance, you can't, if you're doing 1 million records, you don't want to do 1 million XOG calls, right? But you also can't do one, right? So, you have to find that fine line between volume and size of messages. But the key thing also to keep in mind is, you're relying on the response from Clarity, okay, to be able to update some statistics, right? So, let's say we send a message of 50 messages, right? So we're sending project data or we're sending risk data. So we want to send 50 risks at a time. Well, that's great, right? except our response, we're only going to get one response for 50, right? And I don't know how familiar all of you are with XOG, but sometimes the response from XOG can be misleading, okay? And the problem with that is the larger you make your web service messages, the harder it is going to be to pinpoint which actual record caused that problem, okay? So obviously, you know, if you're only going to be loading 100 records, well, I wouldn't create one record to load 100. I would probably batch them in groups of 5. That way, if there ever is an error, right, you can pinpoint it to 5 records. Right? So those are key things that you wanna keep an eye out, right? And then, you know, once we build the messages and send them to Clarity, right? Meanwhile, Clarity is going to process that data and send the response, right? So as you get the response from Clarity, you want to grab that response and you want to trap it and you want to store that in the database, right? Because you do want to map what you sent to what you got as a response so you can actually validate all of your results. And also, like I said, at the end of all of your responses, you can build statistics based on all of the errors that you received, okay? And then you want to build your reporting notification, and that's it. End. All right, I'm gonna stop for a second and see if anybody has any questions. So for the person that asked, elaborating what kinds of validation, was that question actually answered for you as well? And like I said, if you have a particular example, okay, I see one more here. It says, if we're validating everything, does it cause the performance worse? No, it makes the performance better, and that's why you use a store procedure. A store procedure can validate, you know, we use a store procedure to validate 1 million rows, and that's something that's going to occur in 5 minutes, right? The performance problems that you're going to have is sending garbage to your Clarity server via XOG, okay? So if you've got 1 million records and your validation picks up that, you know, 200,000 of them are incorrect and they need to be fixed for X, Y, or Z reasons, then it's going to be much better not to send those records or make sure you send them fixed, because if you send that data and you start sending errors to your Clarity server, that's when you're going to have very heavy performance problems. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spend a couple of seconds and get into, you know, some common technologies and platforms. And when I say technologies, I'm talking really what are common languages that are used for technologies. You notice that under technologies, I have one highlighted in blue or in a different color, and under platforms, I have a couple highlighted in blue. The reason is because those are my favorite. So I'm gonna start with technologies in GEL, and I'm sure everyone that's on this call has built integrations using GEL. Like I said, GEL is, I always call GEL the necessary evil. And the reason I say the necessary evil is because we need it to perform a lot of things within inside of Clarity, but let's say it's not the best language to build integrations. You know, it's GEL. GEL by its nature, it's a scripting language. Therefore, you know, you're always limited with the types of things you can do with scripting languages. And the main problem with GEL is that it runs on Clarity, or it runs on the well, it doesn't have to run on Clarity, but you know, in general, it's going to run on the BG. And that has huge problems, which is basically it's taking memory and resources away from your Clarity server every time these integrations run, right? So if you have huge integrations, right, that have large memory requirements, all they're doing is they're taking the resources away from your Clarity and your background service, and they're eating threads from your Clarity server to be able to perform this data. And the other thing is, to get to the granularity of a very, you know, robust workflow, like the one I just discussed, to do that in gel, I'm not going to say it's not possible, because when I started doing integrations, that's how I used to do integrations in gel, until I realized that, you know, it's very tough to make something good, repeatable inside of that language. Java is my favorite because it's platform independent. It can run on any operating system. It's pretty robust. I'm not going to say it's the fastest language in the world, but it's definitely, you know, one of the fastest. Well, the fastest out of the ones that I have here, and it was the only one that's platform independent and fast, right? Depends. And then the other case is ASP and .NET. So, you know, both of those Microsoft technologies. The problem is you are limited to Microsoft operating systems. The other good thing about Java is Java resources are, I'm not going to say super easy to find, but you know, much easier to find Java resources than gel resources. And you know, the tag library within inside of Java is much higher. Okay. And as far as platforms are concerned, and when I say platforms is where do these integrations actually run? You know, like I said, generally or in the past, you know, a lot of them ran on the background or even on the CA PPM server. I don't like either one of those options. The reason we don't like either one of those options is because they're taking resources away from your Clarity environment to run integrations. And if you have large integrations, that's going to cause you problems. And the other option is operating system. So you can actually, so the way we build, when we build integrations, we build the Java executable that can run in any operating system, and you can use, you know, either Cron tab command or Windows scheduler to run it, right? And that's how you schedule it, right? So, and it can run on another little server that you have somewhere else in your data center. That's got nothing to do with Clarity, right? And last but not least is what's called the IM, which is the integration manager. It's a web-based application that we utilize for hosting and scheduling integrations into and out of Clarity. All right. I'm going to get a little bit into...
We just got one. Did you answer all the questions? I think Gabriel just had one more.
How about the limitations for on-demand clients? Boy, that's kind of a loaded question. I don't really know. I mean, as far as building integrations, like I said, if we go back to the workflow that we were on, there really is no limitation for on-demand. This particular workflow is the same thing for on-premise as it is for on-demand, because here, like I said, all of this happens in a database that's external from Clarity. Okay, so this can be, you know, this particular database where you're staging and validating your data, that can live on your network, or like I said, on our hosted integration manager, or anywhere that you want, right? And when we read the referential data from Clarity, basically what we do is we utilize the query API to extract the data from within inside of Clarity and position it inside of this database. So now this is completely separate from Clarity. It doesn't really matter where the Clarity is. And the rest of the stuff basically happens now from this point forward, we're just pushing the data into Clarity. So we utilize the web service calls to push that data back in. Therefore, you know, there's absolutely no difference. You know, and as a matter of fact, this methodology is much better. So I'm sure if you talk to the on-demand people, they always cringe when somebody says, you know, that they're going to build a large integration using gel, right? Because it really, you know, like I said, when I was talking about the necessary evil, gel is great to do a lot of stuff, but you know, it's very easy to butcher gel and to make it perform very poorly. So if you don't follow very specific best practices when you're doing large integrations, that's really going to kill your background server. And I'm sure, like I said, your on-demand team's going to they're not going to be thrilled with the way you're doing it. Hopefully that answers the question. So here I'm going to talk about validating data and batching with XOG. Oh, and this, like I said, this is a very key question, and I did talk about a little bit about it in the workflow slide. And the reason is, like I said, the responses that we get from XOG are sometimes, I'm not gonna say imperfect, but they're sometimes a little cryptic and hard to read. So what we want to make sure is, you validate, the better that you validate your data, right, the larger that you can batch your particular XOG calls. Okay, and I can't specify this more except when we get into stuff like there's two key things into financial integrations, because the problem with financial integration, or the difference between financial integrations and all the other integrations, is XOG in general either creates or updates depending on the ID, except with financial integrations. With financial integrations, it always creates, right? So you want to be very careful. Let's say your integration's running halfway through and it's halfway through loading a message, and earthquake hits and your integration dies and stops, right? And stops halfway through, right? If you have large web service calls, you don't know where that ended or where that stopped. So to kick it off and restart it from where it left off is very difficult if you have very large XOG calls, right? If you're doing project data, right, you just rerun the whole thing, and whatever was sent, it'll just update it with those records. You're going to be fine, right? But those are things that you really want to keep in mind. And the second item where that could occur is with TSVs, timescale values. Timescale values, the way they work is it does what's called a sweep and replace. So because it's data stored in a blob, it basically takes whatever's in the blob, throws it away, replaces it with what gets sent. You want to be very careful with that as well, because if you miss a particular field, it'll be gone forever, right? So very hard to pinpoint that error, because there's no real easy way to do a query against the blob. And obviously you can time slice into stuff, but it's going to be somewhat slow. And then oops, I didn't want to get to this. So you want to just be careful and validate. Like I said, the more you validate, the better off you're going to be, because the better your XOG messages are going to be sent. And the better XOG messages are going to be sent, the less bogging down that you're going to do of your Clarity environment, because it doesn't have to process any of the error requests, and the easier time your admins are going to have troubleshooting a problem, because it's always much easier to troubleshoot a problem. So I'm going to come back to our store procedure, right, and say, if it's much easier to know what this error is, description was too long, so it truncated to 250 characters, than the Java lang error that you're going to get if you send a field that's too long with inside of XOG, right? So, and this is going to pinpoint it to the exact record, exact column, so it's going to really facilitate life. So yeah, you want to try and spend as much time as possible on your validation. Next topic I'm going to cover is integration results. So notification. Normally, the way we send notifications, it would look something like this. You have your connectivity report, right? So you make sure that you can connect to all of your data sources, that you can connect to your data integrity, to your data staging table, to everything, right? So you have a connectivity report, okay? The second thing that you want a high-level status of how that load went, right? So and this is just a basic pie chart that does a count based on the different statuses of your underscore val table, okay? And then we want to have an overall summary of all of your staging data, time that it takes. So this, normally we actually check how long each particular piece takes, because you might want to know if, like I said, somebody was asking about performance problems. Well, you need to know how long things are taking to know if you have a performance problem. So, this is all within in milliseconds, right? So and also the number of records that you're reading and you're processing at all times, okay? And then your status, okay? You want to know your load status, and then you want to know, how many were unknown, how many records failed, how many were updated, how many were inserted. And then you also want to provide an Excel or some type of grid that contains every single detail of all of your record validation, okay? So, you might have warnings on a particular field, what the reason is, right? How many records actually failed, and for you to be able to drill down onto this and be able to pinpoint all of the records. So this is our common notification. So all of the integrations that we built actually come with this type of reporting, right? So what we do is we have, we wrote an Excel sheet that contains all of these queries, and then obviously clients can add additional queries or additional records to this particular notification to add more permanent information that they may need. I'm going to once again stop here for a second and see if anyone has any questions. If anyone doesn't have any questions, I'm going to be moving on to the next slide, which is for Christopher. So I'll give people a couple of seconds to see if they have anything. And if not, Chris, it's all yours, my friend.
Well, thanks, Federico. That was awesome, and really appreciate you taking the time each month to go through best practices. The feedback from the community has been absolutely fantastic. And and thank you for filling my inbox up with questions as well. So, the big service announcement for us is that after providing these integrations as a service and providing services for many, many years, the team's been working very, very hard under Federico's leadership to provide solutions that are high impact, easy to implement, and cost effective. And in some of our meetings we were discussing, people are often, most of the questions that I get are, how much is it? And so we figured that we take it outside the box and say, we'll let people calculate that for themselves. And so we went ahead and rolled out an instant quoting system for enterprise software. And now I haven't seen it before. It may be out there, but we've looked around quite a bit. And I think that when people get a look at it and they see it, and please, if you think it's awesome, let us know. And if you think it's not, go ahead and let us know, because just like when Gabriel made the comment on the text, the syntax being wrong on that particular piece of code or whatever it was, it's very technical outside my spectrum. Very, very valuable. And so if you think this is awesome, I'm sure I'll get a lot of messages. There's no way that you can do this for that low of a price, or what's the catch. What we're always trying to do is to help you make PPM simpler and really strengthen the community. And so what I was thinking, Fed, not to put you on the spot or anything, but I was wondering, why don't we put it up there right now and let people have a look at it and show how it works, and maybe they can tell us right out of the bat, that's preposterous, you guys are crazy, or wow, that's really awesome, or whatever. But I'll turn it back over to you for just to do looks like you're already on the way to doing it. So.
Yeah, thanks, Christopher. So yeah, on our integration as a service, there's basically a pricing calculator. It's a simple Excel file. And I'm just going to move it over here. So let's say you want to do an integration, and whatever the integration may be, I'm going to say we want to do, I'm going to select projects. Here you specify whether you're on-premise or on-demand, right? If you want us to host the integration, or if you want to host the integration, right? Number of custom attributes. So all of our integrations come with a specified number of attributes. So I'm going to come back to the website here. All right, so I'm going to select, I don't know, change requests. So here it tells you the number of attributes that are included, and you can actually pinpoint and see what the attributes are that come included, right? So any attributes that are not in there would be considered a custom attribute. So let's say we have our project integration, we have 5 custom attributes. That's going to be the cost of that particular integration. So if you have multiple integrations that you need to do, I need to do assets, and in this case here we're on demand, but you want us to host it. And this has 3 custom attributes. So there you go, to build both of them, right? That would be the pricing that you would have to pay for both integrations. So that's our pricing calculator. Like I said, you can find that inside of our website under integrations as a service. You can download that pricing calculator.
Thank you, Federico. And also one of the things I did within the questions is I posted a link to our GEL webinar next month. We're going to do some more best practices there as well. Federico had mentioned that everybody seems to have worked in GEL a little bit. We get a lot of questions on that as well. So I would love to hear people's feedback on the integrations as a service offering, as a pricing calculator. We want to provide things to you guys that in the community that really have needs, and try to help you as much as possible. Again, we have our perspective, our preferential bias. We've been working in the Clarity community for almost a decade, and Federico even longer, and so we try to think that from the feedback that we get from customers that have some of our software tools, that we know that, but that interaction's great. So please, I really do encourage it. I feel like that we've learned more from the bumps along the road, the mistakes that we've made in rolling things like this out than the successes. And so don't be afraid to take a run at me. Federico beats me down all the time. I can take it, and we'll make adjustments if there's enough feedback in particular areas, because we do want to be pliable to your needs. So I think there was one more question that just popped in. Federico, I know we're wrapping up. Do you want to take a shot at that last question?
The notification reporting data needs to be captured while integration run. Does that load Clarity? Not 100% sure I understand the question, but yeah, I mean, part of this, all of the notification piece really is part of your data validation. So you have to make sure that your data validation is correct and works well to be able to report on it. So that's why it's so critical to be very effective with that data validation. I hope that helps.
Well, Federico, I'm sure we'll get a lot of follow-up questions. How can people contact the team if they just want to ask a quick technical question?
They can go to the website, and they can, there's a blog there that says contact IT-ROI, and they'll be able to contact anyone inside of our organization with any questions.
Yeah, pricing and new product information and feedback on the pricing calculator come to me. If you send me technical questions, I'm going to end up just being a hold-up. So if you do go to the IT-ROI Connected website, go to the blog, ask the experts. Those guys are really good. I watch the interaction. They get back to you really quickly. And, challenge the experts. We can all grow together that way. And, boy, I sure appreciate what a wonderful turnout we've had today, Federico. And do you have anything else?
No, I don't have anything else.
All right, guys, we really look forward to your feedback, and sure appreciate the interaction today. Let us know how we can help. And if you don't have anything else, Federico, I think we'll wrap it up.
Well, that sounds great. Thanks, everyone, for attending. I appreciate your time.
Bye now, everybody.